Hi, everybody. I'm back. Thank you to those of you who have chosen voluntarily, you did this to yourself, to tune into this completely not required to watch video that has absolutely nothing to do with the course content of this particular class, but will allow me to speak to something that I'm actually very passionate about in education that I haven't had a chance to share with any of you yet. Um, and I don't have a plan for this video. I don't have an outline. There's no note in front of me at all. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about something that is very important to me as an educator that I want to make sure is on your radar to be in the front of your mind when you are working with your own students. At the MSTA conference this past week, we had a keynote speaker on Friday whose name was Dr. Adolph Brown. I had never heard of this guy before, although he's on a show called The Parent Test on ABC. I'd never heard of it, but I'm going to check it out after seeing his presentation. Um, he came into the auditorium with lots of loud music playing, and he was dancing and wanted everybody up and rah rah rah. And my first thought was, oh Lord, it's gonna be one of these guys. I usually hate speakers that are just there to motivate you, find your why, and all that good stuff, which is important. But I've heard it before. I know my why, and I don't need to sit for an hour and listen to somebody, basically be a cheerleader and want me to be a cheerleader. You may have figured out by my completely awkward appearance on these videos that I'm not really that much of an extrovert. Um, so I'm not gonna lie, the minute he walked on stage, I was with his dancing and his jumping, I'm like, ah boy. And I was leaning back in my seat. Honestly, was about to get my phone out and start scrolling. That lasted about 30 seconds, and then I realized that his presentation was going to be all about substance, and he was going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart. And it reminded me of something that I don't get to do anymore with my college classes. Um, some of you know this, some of you don't. I've been an adjunct instructor for Hannibal Grange for a long time, but up until about 2 years ago, I taught in-seat classes at Poplar Bluff on campus. And it's only in the last couple of years that my classes have shifted entirely online. And one of the things that I really miss about teaching the in-seat classes is just getting to talk to my students. Because this online format is great for reaching a larger number of students. And you guys are from all over the state. And we've got students in this class who are from every corner of Missouri, which is awesome. And I get to know you through your assignments and through your writing, and that's great. But I don't ever get to actually talk to you in this online format. So I'm going to give this a shot because I want to talk about what I feel like is the most important thing in education. And it's not your content knowledge, it's not how many degrees you have hanging on the wall, it's not how long you studied. It's, do you have the ability to connect with kids, and can you put relationships first? Dr. Brown reminded me that my biggest passion in education, my biggest skill as an educator, if I have any at all, is making connections with kids. Um, I have a friend who works community events with me, and she always helps me work the annual Halloween, one of the annual Halloween celebrations in our town. And every year she starts rolling her eyes because she will hear 100 kids shouting, Mr. Clark, Mr. Clark, Mr. Clark. And she's like, oh, well, what's it going to be this year? 100, 200, 300? How many is it going to be? And I said, I stopped counting at 300, whatever, just trying to make her crazy. But it's an enormous responsibility because a good teacher who has a good relationship with a student can make you a teacher who may be great at delivering content, who might be incredibly intelligent with pedagogy and knows your standards and your scope and sequence and your curriculum backwards and forwards, and I have the information and I can get it to you, might fall flat on their face in a classroom if they can't connect with their students and deliver that information in a way that those kids can understand and comprehend. And I know you've heard from, I'll use the word veteran teachers, I guess I am one, um, in the past that the kids don't have to like me. They just got to learn from me. And to a point, I can get that. But here's the deal. Very early on in my college career, I had a college teacher who had a saying, and that saying was steal from the best, learn from the rest. And that's one of the earliest college memories I have, and that has stuck with me for forever. And so if you were to steal anything from me, and I don't claim to be the best at anything, but if you were to steal anything from me, it is this: put relationships first. I am a Title I reading teacher at this point in my career, but I taught third grade for 10 years before that and preschool for 9 years prior to that. And one of the things that I've had people tell me over the years is you have this uncanny ability to get kids to do exactly what you want them to do. And my response to that is always, well, I learned about them. I figure out who they are, figure out how they learn and what makes them tick. I find a success, anything that they can be successful with, anything, celebrate it big and let them do the rest. Once those kids have a taste of success, they usually will take it from there like, oh, I like that. I want more of that. And they're going to figure out how to make it happen. So I'm going to tell you a story. And again, I'm going to remind you, this was completely optional. You did not have to watch this video. So again, thanks if you're still watching. I'm going to ramble for a minute longer, but I'm going to tell you a story. And this is about a third grader that I had several years ago. This was in the 2019-2020 school year. I will never forget it because it was the year that our school year ended on March 17th due to COVID. It was also the best year I ever had teaching. Um, the way my school was set up at the time, our math and ELA classes were ability grouped. So different teachers had different levels of students. You had a class that was your run-of-the-mill, right on level kids. You had a class that was your way above average super achievers. And you had your class of low functioning students who weren't special education, but they were, close to it, a year or more below grade level, struggling with their comprehension, struggling with their fluency, basically in the third grade without the reading ability of a first grader in some cases. Or they were dyslexic or had some other kind of reading disorder that caused them to have issues with their reading. So we start this school year, and I'm sitting with the other Title I reading teacher, and remember, I'm still a classroom teacher at this point, and I'm looking at my caseload and what I've got, and I'm panicking because as much as I love working with kids who have dyslexia, and I do, it's my jam, I was looking at my caseload going 13 of the 17 kids in this class are dyslexic or on the spectrum of dyslexia somewhere. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? There's no way I can do this. Um, and then I met them, and it was some of the most they were some of the most challenging students academically I had ever dealt with. Now, they were fun, they were quirky, they were goofy, they were silly until it came to schoolwork. And then they were deadly serious because they knew they were behind. Those kids know they're behind. One of them in particular had kind of caught my attention because she was very quiet in class. She had the typical just usually had a bad attitude when I would see her in the hallway, never smiled, always unhappy, didn't raise her hand, didn't participate in class. One of my biggest rules in a reading class, and I will pass this on to you also, is never make your kids read out loud in front of the other students if they don't want to. If they volunteer, that's great. But if they struggle to read and they don't want to read out loud in front of everybody else, do not make them. Yes, they need to read to you. They need to read aloud, but you can do that in private while the other kids are working on an assignment. Do not force those kids to read out loud. If you do, and they struggle, and one other kid in that class laughs at them or makes a comment about it, their confidence is gone, and it will take years to bring that back. Years. I'm speaking from experience. I've seen it happen. So I had this one little girl. I will not say her name, of course, for confidentiality reasons, but um, I was working hard on this kid, and I knew she was dyslexic. She was not diagnosed, but I knew that she was dyslexic. And so I was trying to teach her like she's one of those kids. Also, making jokes, asking her, personal questions. What is she like? What is she not like? I do this with all my students. This is not like I'm standing in front of you going, hey, what do you like? I'm trying to get to know you. Come on. That's not the way you do it. You talk to them, your whole class, little groups, in a center, in a station, just getting to know your kids. So we were about 5 weeks into school, and this kid she was doing pretty badly. She had a D plus in my class. She was failing. I mean, not an F level, but she was right there. One day I was teaching, I don't remember what the concept was, but I'll never forget it. She looked up all of a sudden, like she always kind of had her head down like this. Every now and then she glanced up at you, but mostly she kept her head down. She looked up, like her head shot up. She stared at me and she put her hand up. And I called on her. And she said, Mr. Clark, are you saying? And then she repeated what I had said in her own sort of language. And I nodded my head and I said, yeah, that's it. That's kind of what I'm talking about. And she went, oh, well, that's not hard. Huh. All of a sudden, she started talking more in class. She started raising her hand. She started answering questions. She wasn't always right, of course, but she was willing to give it a shot. And I suddenly noticed that there were some smiles on her face and she was talking, she was engaging with me more. And that felt pretty good. I'm not going to lie. About 3 weeks after that, in the middle of some downtime, she raised her hand. This wasn't like walked to my desk. She said this in front of the entire class. She said, Mr. Clark, this is my favorite class. You're my favorite teacher. And I said, oh, well, thank you. And I said, why? And I expected what I usually get, oh, you're silly, you're fun, you're goofy. This little 8-year-old looked at me and she said, you teach the way I learn. And I said, well, that's what we all do. That's what teachers do. That's what we do. And this kid looked at me and she went, no, all of you don't do that. And it cut me like a knife. I sat back and I just went, this little third grader to figure that out at this point, what have you been through? Oh my gosh. So I started doing some digging into her previous teachers. She'd had great teachers. Her kindergarten, first and second grade teachers, friends of mine, very good, solid teachers. When I spoke to them, they all told me to a T, I didn't know what to do with her. She was an anomaly. I didn't know how to figure her out. So, of course, I'm stubborn and I'm like, well, I'm going to figure this kid out. And I worked on her. I took her and worked with her after school. She did tutoring with me, all kinds of things, trying to crack what was going on. And I had already begun to figure out, like I said, she was probably dyslexic. How do I reach this kid? So I loved read alouds in my class. I always do silly voices and all that kind of stuff. And I love doing read alouds. So I grabbed Fish in a Tree, which if you've not read Fish in a Tree, you should. And I read it out loud to my students. By the end of the second chapter, my student had raised her hand. My student, who, by the way, shared the same name as the lead character in this book, write down how she spelled it. And she went, Mr. Clark, this kid is me. And I'm like, yes, yes, she is. She is. She got it. So as I went through the book, I was trying to do some things in my classroom that the teacher in the book did with their students. And my kids were responding to this. They were doing really well. They were making gains. They were making huge progress. This particular student her grades began to improve. She started buying into what I was teaching and she started doing the things I was telling her to do and using the strategies I was giving her and using the resources we were providing. And she was doing better. Parent teacher conference time rolls around. Her mom is working 2 jobs and can't come to the conference. And she asked if we could do a phone conference. And I said, of course. So I call her and I said, hello, this is Mr. Clark from Central Elementary. And the exact words on the other end were, all right, let's get it over with. How bad is she doing? And I said, what? She said, how bad is it? What has she done? How is she acting in your class? Is she causing trouble? What's going on? And I could tell this mama was exhausted. This mama was defeated. She was used to teachers calling and telling her how bad her kid acted in class, how poor her grades were, how she wasn't putting forth any effort, how she would all that stuff. And I sat there on the phone and I said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I called to talk about this amazing kid that sits in my class every day and is giving me 1,000% effort and who's making big progress." And she said, "What?" And she said, you know who you're talking to, right? You meant to call me and not some other parent." And I thought, oh my gosh, what has this poor lady found? So I talked to her for a little while about all the bright spots that I saw from her daughter. And yes, we talked about the bad, because of course there was she was still struggling. She was 2 years below level. Um, I said, I'm going to try this and this and this, and we're going to see how things are working, but we seem to be making some progress. She told me later that I was the first teacher in her daughter's school career who had ever said anything nice about her kid, which blew my mind because this was a fun kid. You'd love to be around this kid. And after that, anything I needed for class, this parent could not provide fast enough. And this parent, she worked 2 jobs, single mom. She had no money, but anything I needed, she made sure we got it. Um, all that happened because I was able to connect with her daughter and to build a relationship with her of trust. It took me forever to crack through the wall she had built around her to protect herself from the failure she was used to. But we finally did because she was able to trust me and realize that I was going to help her. So the point of this entire long thing, which I'm sure is 30 minutes long by now, if you're still here, I should give you bonus points, um, is that relationships are everything. It's probably not a really good college teacher of me to say that academics come second, but academics come second. Relationships are everything. Building connections, building trust with your students will pay off dividends as your school year goes on and as their lives go on. And I'm not saying that your goal needs to be the one that everybody talks about as, he's my favorite teacher. But I'm not going to lie, it is a lot of fun when they come running down the hall the year after they've left you and they want to come and see you and tell you how their day is going and tell you how their year is going and tell you what's new in their lives. The best part as your teaching career goes on with things like that is sometimes they'll come back and they'll tell you that they want to be a teacher, and it's because of something you did. And uh, that is one of the most amazing feelings in the world. And I am now blessed and fortunate enough to work in the same school with no less than 4 of my former students. Um, was one of my college students, and 3 were former third graders of mine. And it's amazing when they walk in the building and you're going, wow, I had a hand in that, and maybe I had a piece of convincing them to be a teacher. Uh, so I just wanted to kind of stress to you, relationships are everything. And our speaker at MSTA this weekend, Dr. Brown, reminded me, kind of put that conviction in my heart to share that with all of you. Um, Dr. Brown has an amazing story. He came from nothing. He told the story that his parents were married for 20 years, and all of a sudden one day they got divorced, and he and his siblings lived with his mom and went from being fairly solid middle class to inner city poverty really fast. So he talks about how he literally came from nothing. He credits the Head Start program as his first start, as the basis of how he got his start. He talked about all the teachers there that took care of him and that they took care of his entire family, that they were out to take care of the entire family. And as a former Head Start teacher and former Head Start administrator and former Head Start kid, by the way, I was a Head Start kid, proud of it. It really made me smile to hear somebody talking about a positive thing that Head Start could do. And his story only got better from there. If you have a spare few minutes, um, I highly recommend checking out his story. I'm going to post some links. There is a video you can watch with an interview that kind of gives his background. He's very inspiring, um, but his name again is Dr. Adolph Brown. He has a website, DocSpeaks.com. This is him. It was a great experience, so much so that I stuck around afterward to meet him because he stuck around and he was, of course, selling merchandise and t-shirts and books and all that stuff. I stuck around to meet him at the end of the line and told him a little of my own story about being a Head Start kid and a Head Start teacher, and he could not have been more gracious and more friendly. Um, and it was very genuine. So I just kind of wanted to share a little of that with you guys. Again, this had nothing to do with our language arts course content, other than perhaps if you read Fish in a Tree, you might understand some of your struggling kids a little bit better. If you've never read Fish in a Tree, it's a great book by Linda Mullally Hunt. It will take, if you're a fast reader, you can do it in, you can knock it out in a couple of hours. It's a kid's book. It's meant for teenagers. Um, but I highly recommend it if you want to get into more of like why your kids struggle. Well, here's a little bit of some background of how it can happen. Um, and also, if anybody has any questions about dyslexia, if you have any questions about reading disorders, any of that kind of thing, I am more than happy to talk for hours about things like that. Um, but I just wanted to talk about relationships, about how important it is to build those connections with your students. Um, like I said, it'll pay off dividends. And again, it's not the goal to be the favorite teacher, although that's a pretty good title to wear. Um, you want to be an influential teacher. You want to be somebody that they will trust. You want to be somebody that they will listen to and that they will talk to, and that at the end of the day, they can count on. And I have found by listening to my students that a lot of the times I will learn just as much from them, if not more, than they learned from me. And it's a really good feeling when you get to see that happen. The student I talked about, by the way, is now in the 8th grade. She was my project for 3 years in my building before I handed her off to the middle school. By the time she left, she had a kind of rough 4th grade year, but she had a great 5th grade year. And by the time she went to middle school, she was making solid A's and B's and some C's every now and then. But had built some confidence in herself and was doing really well. I passed the buck to the middle school to a friend of mine. The band director of the middle school is a very good friend of mine, and I actually work with the band programs, so we kind of work together. And I handed him the ball and I said, I'm trusting you. Don't drop this." And he hasn't. She's first chair in the band in the 8th grade now, and his comment to me is, she's very hard on herself. She's a perfectionist because somebody told her once she could do whatever she set her mind to, and she believed him. And I went, I'll take credit for that. Um, it's a really good feeling when you get to see those kids growing like that. So, relationships, build connections with your students. If you say something to them, mean it, own it. Don't promise things you can't carry out. Under promise and over deliver is a saying that you've probably heard a million times, but it is the truth. Um, that's about it. So for all of you that have made it through this video, completely optional video, that once again, you did this to yourself, you forced yourself to do this. Thank you for listening to me talk about something that's very passionate, that I'm very passionate about. And if you guys want to continue the conversation, let me know, because I'm more than happy to listen to your own thoughts and give you some more of my own. Have a great evening, and thanks again for watching.